Welcome to Super Region 3 Playoff Edition Pod. I'm joined. If you don't know me by now with all our programming, I'd tell you, but this is this is Witt along with my guy John Dykstra in the MIAA, Tony Nicolette and the GLIAC. Fellas, how are you guys doing?
Ready to talk some playoff football.
Well,
smoking and drinking on a Tuesday night, Witt. Lay it out. Here we go.
Whatever it takes.
Some people will catch that. Some people will catch that.
Tony waking up the comments already, but no. We're leading with breaking news, which is not normally our thing, but let's go. It's kind of going to be the elephant in the room otherwise, so let's talk a little bit about it. Just about 3 hours ago,
5 o'clock.
this was literally this was announced that Rich Wright will not be returning to Northwest Missouri State, and while we're not going to go through every coaching move and every super region and things like that. In our world, this is like a move that affects Alabama or Notre Dame or somebody like that.
For sure.
So we're certainly going to talk about it, and all the more. We've got our guy John Dykstra, who actually was breaking this news at 5 p.m. today. He's the beat writer in Maryville, Missouri. So that said, John, obviously, we want folks to go ahead and take a look at the story you've done. You did a huge story on this with regard to having talked to the athletic director and so forth, and this can all be found. We retweeted your story on Twitter, so if you just go to our D2 handle. But John, without saying everything about it, go ahead if you would. Tell us a little bit about kind of what happened with this and so forth.
Yeah, I think talking to AD Andy Peterson, who props to him for talking to me. A lot of times you dump something at 5 o'clock, it's because you don't want to talk about it, but he was very open about the situation and pretty thankful for Coach Wright, because when you look at it beyond just the head coaching, he's been there for 21 years as a DC D-line coach, grad assistant before that, and kind of worked his way up through the program and was a part of some of the best defenses that D2 has seen there in their title run. So he did a lot there, and he's coached the last 7 years, and there've been some highs and some lows, and missing the playoffs the last couple of years is kind of what drove this to happen, I think.
Well, and this is I don't think this is a shock. I think this has kind of been something that's been, rumored or talked about in Northwest circles ever since that we've kind of known that this was going to be a second straight season for the Bearcats not in the playoffs. And I've equated this to Nebraska and Frank Solich and that whole situation where the bar is set so high that this happens, and it's the bar of expectation at Northwest, being the program that they are. And John, if we go ahead and we kind of take a look further at this, Rich had a super successful career by any regular head coaching standards, and let me ask you. For the athletic director, when you guys were having your conversation, did they shed any light on kind of what this looks like going forward? Did Rich get a chance to talk with the team before he left? What other details can you share with us like that?
They had their usual end of season meeting, and normally that would go. Rich would talk to the team. The seniors would each have a chance to address the team and say their goodbyes, basically, and then the upcoming guys, they kind of select players that they see as the leader of the future, will talk to the team. Well, Rich basically joined the seniors in saying his goodbyes, and then Andy Peterson, the athletic director, talked to the team, and interim coach Chad Boswick talked to the team. People around D2 probably recognize the Boswick name, even if you don't recognize Chad.
Yep.
Scott obviously passed away. Scott was his brother. So now Chad is the interim coach and also was the co-defensive coordinator along with Wright last year. So he's kind of the interim coach. But Andy, the AD, told me that this isn't necessarily going to be a quick process. They're looking at guys in the playoffs. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean the D2 playoffs. There's lots of college football playoffs going on right now. But they don't want to interrupt anybody's playoff run, and they're willing to wait and kind of see this through so they get the right guy. You gotta think they've since the 90s, it's been Mel Churchma, Adam Doyle, Rich Wright. That's all they've had as their head coaches. So they're not wanting to rush into this and have somebody that's not somebody they think could be there for the long haul. So I think they're willing to sacrifice that immediacy for talking to everybody they feel like they need to talk to.
Well, you know what, John? What's interesting is 2 years ago, I'm up in Sioux Falls. The University of Sioux Falls went through this type of scenario where, they end up moving on from a head coach and looking elsewhere. And Tony, obviously, with 2 years ago, you guys ran into that up where you're at with Grand Valley going through a similar scenario. But Matt Mitchell obviously went on to Wisconsin, and that was a little bit different feel to that. But, in this day and age, John, a school really needs to be cognizant and be aware of being in touch with the student athlete to make sure that they are engaged a little bit in this process. And don't think that the school is just all of a sudden not doing anything for a while, because the uncertainty of that can lead to people jumping in the portal. So have you gotten the impression that, they're trying to go ahead and keep the student athletes involved in understanding a little bit how this process is going and being as transparent as they possibly can?
Absolutely. And I think that was a part of that meeting today that they had. But also, you've seen Northwest had a couple guys in the portal today. Every team that's not in the playoffs, I feel like, has had at least some people in the portal, and that's going to happen regardless. The other aspect is wherever you get the coach from, if he's a current head coach, that's going to have a trickle-down effect and bring in some of his own guys too. So I think that's just kind of unavoidable that's going to happen at this point whenever you make a coaching change at this point.
Now, I'm going to speculate for a moment that when they make a comment that there's obviously teams that are still in the playoffs and so forth, I immediately think that they're going to want to try and replace somebody in this spot from somebody in the Bearcat family tree, and they've got plenty of coaches to choose from in that moment. Like up here in Sioux Falls, they were looking to do that, but then the guy went to Alabama. But no, no. So, I take a look myself, and I think of names like Joel Osborne, former, offensive play caller, who was at Benedictine, who is ranked in the top 10 in the NAIA, who
a few national championship games,
Right. I'm looking at, Josh Lamberson, who is
also quarterbacked them in a couple national championship games.
Who's at UCM, who, we'll be talking about this a little bit later, but he's got another game left also, despite the fact that they're not playing in the playoffs. They're got a bowl game coming up that we'll talk about. And then kind of the elephant in the room for me is probably Adam Doyle at UCO. Now, as good as they have things going there, and he certainly does, at the same time, he's from Maryville, and he's had great success there. And I already know, leading up to this point, that there's been interest if they were to make a change, that he'd be a name that would be well favored in that local area there. And so
not to when they won 3 national titles for you already.
Absolutely.
For that game.
So now some of this may be kind of a dream pick list per se, but at the same time, that's kind of some of the things that we have in front of us here with this big a move in D2. And as we kind of talked about it a little bit, I think that these are things that we kind of have to look at big picture. Now, certainly, whoever they're looking for, if they still are in the playoffs right now, they need to respect that for all the obvious reasons. But maybe they also look to see who's not under the Bearcat tree, and see if there's some huge name who is really attractive who comes in. But this is a job. It's one of the top jobs in Division II football. So for those who are kind of joining late who didn't know about this is pretty big news in our world in Division II. And John, you've very much been right on top of it.
Yeah, I know we frown upon basketball talk on this show, but they had a pretty darn good men's basketball coach who won a few national titles last year go up and take the job at Drake, Ben McCollum, and they said at the time, we're going to have a national search and do that, and some people were like, how do you not hire somebody under the McCollum tree? Well, Ben might have said something and might have okayed the hire, but they hired Matt Keeley from Arizona, out of a JUCO in Arizona, or an NAIA in Arizona, excuse me, and no ties to Ben as far as coaching or anything like that. So they're not afraid to go outside the tree, I don't think. But when Mel Churchma still has a pretty big voice in that room, I think you might see that tree get explored. And it doesn't hurt. Well, maybe some of the obvious names are still in the playoffs to explore what else is out there, and it never hurts to, if you have to take the time to do it anyway, why not take the time and make the most of it?
When you mentioned Coach Churchma, Tony shook his head. Yes, I had the very same thought that Tony did.
Yeah.
Tony, I was going to say this. If you're gonna be looking into who's going to be the next person leading this program, that's certainly somebody you would want to have buy-in from, isn't it?
Well, one would think, and I know that his influence over that program is still present. I can't speak to how overarching it is or it isn't, but I mean, there was a stretch of time where
Board of Regents.
Yeah. Well, but I mean there was a team that I used to cover back in the day in the GLIAC that for a long time after one of their more venerable coaches had retired, he still had some sway over what they did or didn't do as a program. So I mean it's you see that occasionally where somebody builds something really special and that person's influence is going to be present probably long after they hang up the whistle, and are still in and around and a part of the community and what have you. So to hear that Coach Churchma has still got some sway, it doesn't surprise me in any way.
Witt and I talked about this when I did a story on Mel and his health issues earlier this year, but he is still very involved with all the coaching circles and with his coaches connection thing he runs, and he's it's not like he's checked out and hasn't followed it around for a while. So I think they'd be foolish not to use him as a resource if you can. Obviously, there are other people making decisions now, and he is just that, a resource and not a final say probably. But when you've got somebody like that right in town, I think his voice still has some sway. John,
there's a question that was brought up here by Joe, and we didn't mention Coach Clayton, who is at Northwest and now is at Saginaw Valley. I think primarily because he doesn't have that kind of head coaching experience that I feel like they're going to be looking for. That's not to say that he couldn't be a part of the conversation as well. That's just kind of my own hunch, is they're looking for someone who's got that kind of experience coming into this job.
With Brandon, I think the interesting thing is looking at why he left. He was the secondary coach and the recruiting coordinator and the special teams coordinator. He had a lot of titles here, but none of those were co-defensive coordinator. Rich called the defensive plays, sure. And Chad Boswick was the co-defensive coordinator, who is now the interim coach. So Brandon was kind of third in the depth chart of play calling responsibilities defensively. And I think that's why it made a lot of sense for him to make the switch when he did to Saginaw. and to kind of run a defense on his own. Now that's an interesting thing with Coach Boswick, obviously being named the interim coach, and if they do go the offensive route, maybe having a defensive coordinator ready made that could kind of follow that Brandon Clayton model of getting their chance to run a defense. But I don't know if BC would be that head coaching type candidate.
Well, John, I appreciate you giving us all this insight. And for those just tuning on in, feel free to go ahead and check out John's article with the Maryville Forum. We retweeted it on our D2 Twitter page. This is pretty big news in our D2 world. Guys, we are going to go ahead and move past this to the intent of why we were on here, which is to go ahead and look at, the kind of the lay of the land with Super Region 3. And we're going to go ahead and, we took a look at the bracket the other day. We didn't really take a deep dive into it. Boy, I tell you, if there's any bracket to take it, any quad to take a deep dive into, this sure is the one. We've got Ferris State with the top spot as expected, Grand Valley 2, Pitt State 3, Central Oak 4, all those teams hosting. And, we talked a little bit about it the other night, that the one matchup that I think jumps off the page more than anything else, and I think it's the best matchup in round one period, is the one right in the middle of the page, with the Bisons going to play the Gorillas. I
spend about an hour and a half talking just about that game. There's a lot of angles to that one.
Yeah.
Well, Tony, what was your thought when you first saw this pop up on the bracket?
Well, I think first and foremost, you start with a Harding team that's the defending national champion, and by the process of a single loss, basically went from controlling their destiny to have the same path at home that they had last year, and now they end up on the 6th line. I just think that that's, one of the reasons, and not to get on the soapbox, but it's just one of the reasons why, we sure hope that there are continued changes to how Division II does its playoffs, because a team of that caliber essentially goes from being ranked somewhere in the 1 through 4 in the country, and by losing a close game against a key conference rival, now is somewhere in, basically what, 21 through 24? I don't know. That just seems kind of silly to me. And it's not dissimilar to what we saw with how things happened last year with Ferris. I mean, that was a top flight football team that got treated like a 7 seed. And it just wasn't fair to the Bulldogs for what they had put on the field in terms of a body of work throughout the entirety of that season. So I think it's extremely intriguing that Harding has to play on the road as a 6 seed. And, I think we're kind of in a funny way back to where we were last year with them too, in that because of the insular schedule and because of, just the way their season unfolds, there's kind of still a lot that we don't necessarily know about these guys. I mean, they ran roughshod through the GAC, but that's not really all that unexpected. So
right.
It's the types of defenses that traditionally only a Northwest or a Pitt State or a Grand Valley or a Ferris can put on the field are the ones that can stop them. Obviously, Ouachita figured out a way to do it this year, so that's intriguing. And so when I look at that matchup, it's like, okay, Pitt State ought to be able to keep this game competitive from the standpoint that I think that they've got what they need to be able to, you're not going to completely stop Harding, but can you slow them down enough where they don't run for, 5 1/4 and put 6 bills on you? But then you've got to start looking at the other side. Can Pitt State score enough? I mean, is this going to be like a 7-6 type of game like we saw when Harding played Grand Valley last year?
Right.
And you mentioned the playoff system that might need to change. Well, the MIAA went away from the insular schedule this year, and if they hadn't done that, Pitt State is not a 3 seed with 2 conference
all day.
They are riding that win over Ferris State, and maybe, I don't know how the GAC does it. The MIAA kind of was able to do it because they lost some teams and were able to work in some extra weeks there. But maybe that's the next stop, because that insular schedule definitely hurt both them and Ouachita this year.
Yeah, and Pitt State would have been on the road without a doubt. They probably would have been the last team in the field.
Quite
Um,
possibly.
Yeah, with a 500 strength of schedule, yeah.
yeah, and 2 losses.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, and we'll have more time to talk a little bit about the playoff setup, and we'll even maybe open up a segment we can have our own little festivus about that. But because I've got some strong thoughts about that, like Tony does. So let's go. We're going to go ahead and kind of do what I'm going to call a viewer's guide for those in SR3. We did this with the SR4 field last night. Just so those who are tuning in, this is a completely different show than what we had on Sunday evening. On Sunday evening was more of a reaction to things because we didn't have time to process it. Let's be really honest. We prepared for a show, put on a show, made some picks, and that was about it. Tony will tell you. But
I was there.
We've had a chance to take a harder look now at everything, and I've changed all my picks. No, I'm just kidding. I haven't done that. So first of all, we're not going to take a deep dive on Ferris this week because they don't play. But Tony and East coach right here and his squad went ahead, won the GLIAC, and deservedly are the top seed in SR3, and we're going to talk quite a bit about them next week when they have their first contest. Let's go ahead and talk a little bit more in our viewer's guide. We're going to introduce these teams to you in the event they are not in your super region. You're going to find out a little bit more about them, maybe about certain players you didn't know about. But John, you were going ahead and kind of working up some of these, kind of these comparison slides. In doing that, we've kind of got the areas in white in this specific instance highlighted that really stand out. Now, I've made Tony talk about Grand Valley a whole lot this year. John, I'm going to let you talk about him for a moment, and then I'll let Tony go after that. What were some of the things that jumped out to you, John, good or bad, when you were looking at this stat comparison?
Well, the rushing offense and really the total offense, but the rushing offense obviously stands out. We'll get to some other teams that run the ball, but they run in a different style than Grand Valley does. Grand Valley, 247 yards, not in a traditional option, is really impressive, obviously. And the fact they can limit the other team's passing games too to 136. That's why I highlighted those two stats. But I think if you look on this page, the other thing that stood out to me and kind of surprised me, and then I remembered as I thought back to it, is they've actually lost 2 of their last 3 meetings with UIndy. I think we all kind of chalked this up as probably a Grand Valley meeting the winner of Harding and Pitt, and not to spoil too much for later, but I still think that's the case. But it's not like UIndy hasn't been competitive with the Lakers over the years, and I think that makes for kind of interesting. But Grand Valley, aside from that Ferris game, they've looked as strong as anybody in the country this year, I think.
Now, Tony, offensive scoring for me, Grand Valley has had much higher numbers in past years. When people ask about their offense right now, is it something where it's unsettling? Is it something where they're still working things out with the quarterback situation? What are your overall views on that?
Well, I mean, there's a lot to unpack there, Witt. I mean, so in terms of what their scoring offense is, I actually thought Wayne Cavati characterized things on when he was on D1 Rejects this week really well by saying Grand Valley, the way they operate now in year 2 under Scott Wooster, may not be what they were a few years ago under Matt Mitchell, in that this is a brand of football that doesn't care about what the final score is, as long as the Lakers have more points than whoever they're across the field from. So ugly is of no consequence. Doesn't matter how good or bad the opponent is. The W is all that matters. And so I think they've spent a lot of time this year doing a whole lot of different things on offense for a whole host of different reasons. Trying to make sure that quarterbacks have health, trying to make sure that more quarterbacks get reps, trying to figure out what offensive line configuration and alignment is actually the most effective depending on what it is that they're going to try and attack on a given opponent. Ian Shoemaker's in his first year as the offensive coordinator, and so he came in. And I think where Scott Wooster wants to take the program in total in the future, there were a lot of those pieces present this year, but you may still see some additional adaptations and moving forward as we go into years in the future. So I think for this Grand Valley team, again, I think it's more about ugliness doesn't matter. In fact, they almost relish in it. They'd rather it be an uglier game that you think that they underperformed, and yet they found a way to scratch out the win anyway. So, again, how many points they get really doesn't matter to them. But John is definitely on target with the rush offense. They want to pound you to death. Coach Wooster kind of comes from that older Michigan, Ohio State kind of a mindset. And we saw Jim Harbaugh do something kind of similar last year. I mean, if you really stop and think about it, J.J. McCarthy had some big games for Michigan, but they really just beat you into submission every week. And so I think
it wasn't him throwing, right.
Correct. So I think that's kind of where they want things to go. The difference with this Grand Valley outfit, though, too, is that they're going to do a little bit more with the quarterback than, say, Michigan did. So, again, keeping guys like Avery more healthy throughout the year has been maybe a little bit more of a challenge than the Lakers would have hoped. And that's not to disparage anyone. It's just, hey, football's a tough game, and you run the quarterback, they run the risk of getting hurt. So, but that's the type of balance that they want is across multiple backs and, getting the quarterbacks involved as best they can as well. And so that's why when you see, Cavati also talked today about Khalil Eichelberger. He's been had a fantastic season for Grand Valley this year. And yet, I mean, you look at his stats, 755 yards is really not, it's a fine number, but it's not anything like, holy smokes, that's their lead guy. How do you stop him? And part of that's because Grand Valley will do so many things in the run game, whether it's multiple different backs that see carries in games. They'll get receivers involved in jet action and those types of things. And then the quarterbacks are active in the run game as well. So, I mean, it's one of those things where the kids seem to buy into an idea that they don't really care who gets the credit as long as the team wins. And so that's why you see numbers that maybe individually aren't always all that impressive, and yet they add up to a rushing total for a team that, to JD's point, if you're not running the option and you're still putting up those kind of numbers, geez, that's a team that can run the football.
Yeah, and, I think they just go about it a different way.
Yeah.
And, Tony, I think for those who may be looking at these stats thinking, okay, the quarterback only has 7 touchdown passes, only 112 yards passing. Well, there's a few things going on here. First of all, the quarterback played the equivalent of about 9 games, maybe.
Yeah, maybe not even that much.
Right. And in and out due to injury. It's all about them trying to have him ready to go when they need him ready to go. Mm-hmm. And Khalil Eichelberger, I don't think he had more than 18 carries in any single game. So, I mean, he's averaging right around 12 touches a game. Well, when you're only averaging 12 touches a game, you're not going to have eye-popping numbers. Let's be really honest. When they leaned on him, he put up 129 against West Florida against a decent run defense and 2 scores.
Yep.
So it kind of tells you a little bit about when they need these guys. Don't kid yourself. Avery Moore or Eichelberger, one of them is probably going to have 100 yards rushing this weekend. Maybe they're both going to have good games. But they're going to lean on those guys heavily, in my opinion. I think, Tony, is it fair to say they're not going to make Avery Moore throw the ball any more than Avery Moore needs to throw the ball, because the way they want to play is to win up front and be able to win with the run game?
Yep, and that's pretty much been their MO most of the year. So that's why, when you see, to me, when I always look at quarterbacks, the first number I go to is completion percentage. And so for a team of this caliber to have their starting quarterback only completing 55% of his passes, normally I'm looking at that going, geez, that's a weakness. But if you really see and understand how Grand Valley runs their offense,
right?
It's not that they don't like to pass and they don't like explosive plays, but if they could run the ball 75 times a game and win, they'd do it, and they wouldn't even think twice about it.
And they'll save it for a few shots downfield.
Yeah, exactly. And that's the other thing too is you talk about kind of hidden talents and you don't sleep on anybody. Khalil Eichelberger is actually a great pass catcher out of the backfield too. So that's the other thing is you just don't know from week to week how they're going to use guys. I think the third leading rusher on the team is maybe a little bit further down. Kyle Knott's a guy who
Right.
he doesn't have a ton
everything.
of rushing yards, but he's not dissimilar to like how Ferris State uses Brady Rose. From week to week, you don't know what he's going to do. He might get 3 touches in a game. He might get 13. You just don't know, and that's part of what they want is they just want you guessing.
When I watch Grand Valley, I think that they have supreme trust in Kyle Knott, and they trust him to do all kinds of different things with that offense. I think that's a good comp that you just made there, Tony. And, with the fact that they're willing to give him jets, take shots down the field, whatever it is. I mean, they may do like the Philly play with him and have him throw a pass this week. We'll have to see. But
Knott and Rose were both high school quarterbacks, so they've got these kind of Swiss Army knife sets of tools that they can deploy whenever they're asked.
Well, that said, for those who haven't given a look-see at Lubber Stadium, there we have it. One of the top places in Division II to watch a game. You can go. That's a great shot that they have there. And we have the matchup in the top right corner, 1:00 kick. And Tony, are you going to be able to be at that football game?
Probably not going to look like this on Saturday. I'll be perfectly honest with you.
Well, you know what? We're at that time of year though, where getting the playoff attendance, weather gets cold, stuff like that happens. It's a little tougher deal. It always is.
No, you're not going to see any foliage that you're enjoying there and the backdrop there. And attendance will wane as it gets cold. And to answer your question directly, no, I have a nephew playing in a state semifinal at the exact same time. So,
that's kind of cool.
Family comes first. I get to go watch that. So it's going to be fun.
That's right. So, Dykstra, that means you got to give a full report on the game. That's how that works. See what Tony just did to you?
I've been there once, but that's a little bit of a drive. So
I'm a bit of a delegator, JD, in case you haven't caught on to that yet.
Yeah, Northwest isn't in the playoffs. Guess what? You're covering Grand Valley now.
Yeah.
But, well, let's go ahead and kind of keep moving through our list of introducing the teams. Pitt State, third seeded team here. Rush defense 91 yards a game. That certainly makes sense to me. John, you and I have talked about this team all season long on our MIAA Weekly, and they've kind of been up and down and things of that sort. They've had some great highs as well. But what are some of your takeaways here looking at their numbers, for better or worse?
Yeah, well, I highlighted the key wins thing for a reason. When you beat Ferris State and you beat Central Oklahoma, you can beat anybody in the country. They've shown you're capable of that.
No doubt about it. But
then you got a consistency in the playoffs. If they're able to bottle that and put that forward, then that's a heck of a recipe. And now going against the GAC teams, they like to run the ball in that conference. So I also highlighted 91 yards rushing per game. I think that's a huge stat going into this one. Because slowing down Ouachita when we get to that matchup on the ground is going to be really key. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing. Their offensive numbers simply aren't there with the other teams in this region, the other true contenders for a national title. And I still think Pitt is a contender for a national title, even despite that, because that defense is capable of being so good. But they're going to have to find some kind of consistency offensively to kind of keep their run going, and especially with the road they're looking at where they're playing Harding and then maybe 2 trips to Michigan in a row. You're going to have to score some points to win those games.
Tony, you've had a chance to see Pitt State as, they've gone ahead and played in consecutive years, Ferris State up in Michigan and also Grand Valley.
Yeah.
In both of those contests, they were able to go ahead and throw punches and be pretty on level footing with both of those squads. Wasn't that kind of your observation?
Yes and no. And what I mean by that is people got to remember that when they played at Ferris 2 years ago, Ferris turned the ball over. It was either 4 or 5 times in that game.
Right, but outgained them quite a bit, right?
And so Pitt State, I think they lost by 3 and had a chance to tie it or take a lead in the last minute. But when somebody spots you, +3, +4, +5 in the turnover margin, I mean, that's as much of what they're doing to themselves as what you're doing to them. So yes, they hung in there with them, but they had some help. And then I actually had a chance to be in the booth for the Pitt State Grand Valley game last year, calling that. And the biggest thing that I noticed was that when Grand Valley decided to go tempo, which they really didn't do until the fourth quarter, Pitt really didn't have much of an answer for it. So I don't know if that was a combination of maybe Grand Valley had kind of finally gotten enough body blows in that the Pitt defense wore down a little bit. But when Grand Valley ran tempo, they were able to move the ball pretty freely up and down the field, and that led to those two scoring drives that proved the difference in that game. And I think additionally, too, I think Grand Valley's secondary did a good job of mixing up some coverages because Dotson got kind of baited into a couple of throws I bet he wished he could have back that ended up being picks. So yeah, I mean, to say could Pitt survive 2 trips to Michigan conceivably if they had to make those? And again, that's presumptive on our part. You know, they could be home for one of those games. You don't know, but I mean, sure, they've got what they need to be able to punch with those, but they got to cash in when they have opportunities. Which those 2 games are examples of games where they had really good chances to win and they weren't able to close teams out.
For as many questions as we have about the Pitt State offense now, there were way more questions 2 years ago, though.
For sure. I would agree with that.
Chad Dotson Jr. was a sophomore
Yep.
starting quarterback. Now he's 3-year starter, as it says in the graphic. Good timing on that, Witt. And he's assuming they have him, which it sounds better than maybe it sounded on Saturday. I've heard some good things in that regard. So assuming they have him, they have that explosiveness offensively. And I wasn't sure who Witt was going to put in this graphic, but I like that he put both linebackers in there. I think that's the strength of their defense. Jack Barkley, I mean, you talked with our guy AC yesterday about sometimes those numbers aren't going to look as great when you're on a dominant defense because you're not on the field that much, and that's kind of make no doubt about it. Jack Barkley is one of the best linebackers in the country, so I think that's kind of going to be the key going up, not only this week, but if they can advance and make some Michigan trips, that heart of their defense with him and Gaskell is going to be huge.
Yeah. Now, Jack Barkley, I'm going to tell you, don't be surprised if he has about 15 or 20 tackles this week playing against an option attack. He's going to be that guy getting ready to get the fullback coming through. And a lot of times when you play a four-man front, that middle backer ends up getting a whole lot of tackles. Yeah. And if you take a look at some of the backers they have, some of the DBs they have that can tackle, I think that this lends well for them to be able to defend Harding very well in that manner. There was a question, brought on up about, has whoops, and that was the wrong one. I'm sorry. They're moving as I'm clicking on them. Has Pitt played the triple option team this season? And obviously, in this case, they will not have because there is not one, per se in the MIAA. But 91 yards doesn't mean much against HU when you give up 3.2 per carry. Well, here's my thought on this: is first off, that if we go ahead and we look, this team here, Harding will have not played this good of a defense, flat out. End of story. Ouachita's got a good defense. This is a little different level defense. I've seen this up close, and their backers can tackle really well. And Harding may still end up going ahead and getting loose and having some big plays. However, I don't see this game getting up and score, guys. I just don't see it. The other thing is that Chad Dotson, as we mentioned on Sunday night, left their game with Northwest just before halftime with what appeared to be a neck concussion, a shoulder, something, where he got tumbled over trying to score on a run, and looked like he was, probably going to be heading into concussion protocol or something. So whatever it was, he's at risk of maybe, is he playing, is he not playing? What's that all look like? And even with him, 12 touchdown passes, 8 interceptions, there's plenty of times in the red zone that this offense has not taken care of business and gotten touchdowns in the red zone. They have settled for field goals. John, you and I have talked about this quite a bit this year. They were amongst the worst red zone offenses in the MIAA in terms of making touchdowns. And in a game like this, I think you're going to need those. This Harding defense that they're going to be going against is a very good one, too. Now, that said, something that we haven't, kind of looked into or talked about is on the far right side, for those who have not had a chance to see Pitt play,
Big Luke.
Luke Nigaman has been a guy who has really come on for them. Former high school quarterback. I'm going to guess he's 6'3", 230, something like that, and he can move. He's kind of like an Avery Moore, Tony, but maybe a little more sturdy even. And they use him plenty when they want to go ahead and do Wildcat now.
Oh, yeah.
And he's a redshirt freshman player. He had a block punt touchdown this last week against Northwest. And didn't he also score twice on the ground against Northwest?
All three of their touchdowns came from him. He had a block punt and then 2 Wildcat rushing touchdowns. So he's a threat. And if Dotson's at all limited, you probably see more of him. And I don't know if that's a good thing for opponents because he can run the ball. And if you haven't,
prep for it.
How good they can be up front against teams, if that will matter, and they can just. Because there's not much element of surprise with him. But it's hard to stop because he's powerful and their line is powerful.
Well, the fact that he's used to taking snaps like a quarterback and everything else, too. I mean, Tony kind of talked about how, Kyle Knott. And those type of players are super handy to have. What happens if you go ahead and you look like you're running a jet with him and all of a sudden he stops and pops? I mean, that's where I'm kind of waiting to see. Do they put in some type of package for him where he goes ahead and I'm running. Nope, I'm not. And all of a sudden, the safeties who are coming downhill expecting run, they just had a receiver run past them. So it would be interesting to see if something like that does occur. But once again, I think this is the best game, guys, that we have in round 1.
Although Tony said earlier the first thing he looks at is completion percentage. Their backup quarterback was 5 for 5 last week. I'm just saying. So
right.
Okay. All right, you got me. Because you're not revealing that was for 3 total yards, I believe.
3 total yards. Get it out there.
But you did catch me on that one, JD. I got to see that.
I didn't think I'd derail the show then, but might as well now as we're wrapping up Pitt.
Well, let's go ahead and move on to our next squad here. And I know we've got some folks in the comments who have interest in UCO. And UCO, talk about something that's a polar opposite in regards to how they're going about their business versus Pitt or Grand Valley for that matter. John, 47 points a game, 450 yards allowed per game on defense, a whole lot in the pass game, everything else. My biggest question with all of this is, John, it kind of felt like for the last few weeks they've been kind of putting Humpty Dumpty back together a little bit.
Yeah.
You give me your thoughts.
I mean, there's a lot of big numbers on that page, and half the big numbers are good and half the big numbers are bad. When we go down to it, I mean, 47.5 basically points per game. You don't think of that as a team that needs to make a quarterback change, and they did. We'll see if Jet Huff gets any action this week, but I mean, Dawson Hurl, there he is, right there, is on the screen for a reason, and he's kind of stepped into that spot and has given them a spark. And
John, let me stop you for one moment. Yeah. For those who are coming in fresh, they may have heard me mention Dawson Hurl on our Sunday night show. We have in here interim starter 1 start. He started the last game, and actually, if you take a look, had 368 yards passing, ran for 74 more, ran for 60 plus the week before that in relief duty. But what I want you to tell our viewers a little bit more about who's Dawson Hurl, because some of them don't know him at all.
No, most wouldn't. He was a starter at Missouri Southern early in his career. And Missouri Southern has had their struggles over the years, but they were actually getting better with him there. And then last year he transferred to UCO, and he was thought to, hey, maybe. I mean, he left a starting job, and you'd think, hey, maybe that's his job to get. And they had an incumbent there, and they went with Stephon Brown all year. He kind of sat behind Brown, and then we got some spot duty, and then this year they bring in Jet Huff, and he's sitting again. So he kind of went for a guy that was starting in the MIAA every week to basically 2 years off, and now he's getting his chance again. And he is, like you said, he is taking advantage of it lately here and playing really well with a very, very good cast of characters around him.
Yeah, I mean, you look at some of the weapons he has. Jalen,
Cottrell. Somebody the whole D2 world doesn't talk very much about because we talked about Jet Huff and Terrell Davis. Jalen Cottrell is a heck of a running back.
Yeah.
Well, and not to mention, John, the other running back's name slips my mind. Mason, maybe?
Yes.
And he, I mean, we put him on another team. He could be an 800,000-yard rusher.
He's got 750 with it.
Yeah, he's over 700.
Right. Yeah. Terrell Davis has had maybe as big a year as anybody in Division II, and it will take the top off of a defense. They've also got the freshman receiver.
Yes. It made an impact too, and it's kind of helped them balance out Davis, because it was a lot of Davis early, and that's not necessarily a bad thing because he is very good, and kind of any way to get the ball in his hands, they're going to try to do it and let him create. But
the question becomes, how do you stop him then, John? I mean, they've got a great running game. I think they can throw for 400 on you in a heartbeat. This kind of has a feel like last year's UCM to some extent, but the quarterback situation is a little different. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
Now, for what it's worth, though, I think the one thing that Dawson Hurl gives them a little bit more than what Jet Huff did was the fact that he's able to get chunk yards in the run game a little more frequently. When you got a guy who's getting 60, 70 yards running a game, that's really supplements your run game and changes the way you can defend a team when that guy's sneaking out that often. So let's watch that. And needless to say, this team's offense is in great hands. They need to be able to show their defense can get stops, because otherwise Ouachita is going to go ahead and try and run the ball on them and shorten this game up.
Yeah, it was incredibly similar to UCM last year. Only difference is, like you said, Zabrowski was well on his way to win Harlan Hill last year, and Dawson's in his second start of the season. So that's a big difference. But boy, they got the weapons, and their running game's been underrated all year, like you said. So they're a dangerous team if they can get any stops.
Well,
look at that chain.
That's such a question, though, too, man.
Yeah.
I mean,
this super region, in any other, as our comments have pointed out kind of all night, in any other super region, you might be setting up for a deep run. In this one, you got to have both sides of the ball working for you.
For sure.
And by the way, I'm going to bring this up before I forget quick. We've got a question here. Where can we watch the games this weekend? Real quickly, guys, we're going to have a little slide on that in a minute. ESPN Plus is where we have been told that the games will be. All about that. If we can get one centralized location, that's not going to cost an arm and a leg. I'm all for it. I'm good with that. So that's what we've been told. If they end up not being there, I don't want to hear about it. So
it works smoothly. That's a beautiful solution. So hopefully
I'm good with that. Let's move on to Ouachita Baptist 10-1 squad. So we go ahead and we take a look across the numbers here. They're not going to be the kind of team that's going to have those eye-popping stats we just looked at a minute ago. They have a little bit more of an identity that's similar to what a Grand Valley's trying to do, or I would say more what Grand Valley's trying to do than I would Pitt. When I see them, we go ahead and, we see that they, of course, had the highest of highs and lowest of lows at the bottom of the page with Harding and Southern Mass. I look at, and by the way, I'll come back to that slide here in just a moment. Let's look at some of their players, and I just realized we still have from a leftover slide Kennedy McGill as their quarterback, who is not their quarterback. He did not get in the portal, and he is not starting for Ouachita Baptist this weekend. But Mr. Livingston is their quarterback. I forget his first name. I'm sure they'll have it in the comments here in a moment. But he is a good run threat. But he's been dinged up going down the stretch quite a bit, which has been a little bit of the signs of why they seem like they were leaking oil there for a little bit. But hard running quarterback, but the guy in the middle gives them a little bit of peace because Kendall Givens, almost a 4,000-yard rusher, for his career. He does, like we were talking earlier, Tony, about how much Eichelberger was getting carries. Givens doesn't get a massive workload either. That's why he doesn't have 1,000 yards yet, but he scored 15 times.
Right.
And he's got an eye-popping 72 career touchdowns. I don't know if anybody else has that much as a regular position player in the tournament.
Not that I could think of, other short of maybe Siobhan Wright for Charleston, right? I mean,
that's a wild number when you think about it.
72 career touchdowns is pretty massive. But I think the way you're characterizing Ouachita is fair, Witt, in that Kendall Givens is kind of the bell cow, and Eli Livingston, he's had pushing up towards 600 yards rushing this year. So he's a guy that when he plays, you're going to count on him for 65, 70, 75 yards a game. And so if you're, trying to get up towards that 200 yards a game average and your lead backs get you 75 or 80 and you're getting about that again from your quarterback, you're a long way towards home.
Yeah.
Just with those two guys. The problem is that you mentioned it. That's, a high percentage of your carries. So A, those guys have got to be durable. And then B, does that start to make you just that little bit predictable? And I think that's going to be one of the challenges that Ouachita has moving through this tournament. I don't know how big of a challenge they're going to have with it this coming Saturday, just because UCO has shown such a not a disdain for defense, but just a, kind of, hey, we're just going to outgun you. And so, I got a feeling that they'll be able to run the ball and do kind of what they want. The question becomes, can they get any stops themselves? Try and make sure that they don't have to be perfection every time that they have the ball and score. Because that's being able to keep up with an offense like what UCO is going to put on the field is going to be a really tall order.
Now, I do have a concern with the Ouachita offense that their top receiver, Connor Flanagan, has not played since that Southern Nazarene game. And he is kind of a Kyle Knott type player for them, Tony.
Yep.
A guy who can do a little bit of everything. And he does anything from returns to being a guy that they count on for the big, their biggest plays in the passing game. Without him, I think that's a little bit of an issue if he's not ready to go. Now, John, let me ask you, when I ask you about what are your thoughts on Ouachita, what comes to mind for you when trying to kind of characterize this team a bit?
Well, to hammer home the Givens point from before, he did the first, I believe, 2 years of his career behind TJ Cole, and he still had all those numbers. So
right.
TJ Cole got his share of touchdowns too. That just tells you how interesting that is and how impressive that is. But with Ouachita, I think it's an interesting matchup this week with Doral and UCO, because Doral and UCO, Doral at least, spent some time at Northwest. And over the years, these option teams in the GAC, Harding and OBU, have struggled going against the Northwest defense. So I wonder if this is does Doral have any secrets from back in those days that he still can put in, and maybe this is the type of offense that UCO can possibly stop. Now, I have concerns about that because they haven't stopped too much this year. But
John letting his inner MIAA homer come out right now.
That's a little thought when we talk about kind of this matchup and everything. But yeah, OBU, like that last slide showed, they can beat anybody, just like we said with Pitt. They beat Harding. I mean, we'll talk later. Harding still might be the best team in the country, and OBU beat them. And then they lost to Southern Naz. So it's kind of just what Ouachita Baptist team you get on a given week. And that's a lot of this region, obviously, with how even the matchups are.
Well, John, one of our guys in the comments, JB, says, Ouachita's going to have a huge day on the ground like Pitt did. I wouldn't be shocked by that. We could have a track meet that is one team passing and running a little bit, and the other team doing a lot of running.
Yeah.
And but if you're OBU, I think that you'd rather try and play a little bit more of a style where it's not quite that track meet, and a little bit more of, hey, let's not feel like we got to snap the ball with 20 seconds left on the clock. So we'll have to see, but I think OBU's defense is probably what gets left out of the conversation sometimes. Linebacker, Jax Miller leads the squad in tackles. They've got Josiah Johnson, number 23, a safety. You go back and watch that Harding game. When they would try and run the jet sweeps out to the edge, he was the guy who met him at the edge. And he'll come up and hit you. And I think OBU is gonna have some times in this game where they look pretty darn good defensively, and then I think there's gonna be other times where they have not seen a passing game,
right?
The likes of UCO, and UCO's athleticism and what they can do in that passing game. I have a feeling that's going to be something that's really going to stretch them, because they're very good at stopping the run like this. But I just don't think the passing games in the GAC is at this level that we're talking about.
No, and Terrell Davis, we kind of went over him last time, but you got to have a matchup to that, because they are not going to be afraid to just call his number over and over again.
Yeah.
We've seen it a lot in the MIAA. And so if you can have a game plan for him, you can slow them down a little bit, but having a game plan for him is a question of itself.
Right.
Well, and by the way, I've seen some of these going on out today where the AFCA, we had Coach Dorrell on the previous one, and Todd Knight also winning and these are not the same these are not regions set up just like super regions. I don't know why, but they're not. And but obviously, yeah. So I mean, he goes ahead and congratulations here. One concern I have for the GAC as a whole is having the Battle of the Ravine the last week of the season. I think that's maybe something that they want to change going forward, and here's why. That game cannot be bigger than playoff games for your squads.
Yeah.
That's my take. Is I realize that this is a massive game in Arkansas. Nationally, it's a big game, but this is not a playoff game. And when you have to play that game last week of the season, like Ouachita has the handful, each year here like this, I think it gets it's real tough for them to come off that game and all the emotions, everything that goes into winning that game, and then you have a playoff opponent right on the heels of it. So I realize that this is not for everyone in the GAC, but for those two teams, Henderson and Ouachita, almost every year those two teams are in the mix somehow.
Yeah.
So I think that they would be better served to have that game a few weeks up a little earlier in the year. I just don't think it serves them any good with having that late in the year. I listened to the broadcast, and the people doing the broadcast completely disagreed with what I was calling for, and they said that it's a great build up to the end of the year. And I thought to myself, you're not thinking about the playoffs one lick when you say that. So that's how I see that, Tony. I know my soapbox, but
no, and I don't disagree with what you're saying. At the same time, I guess it's a matter of what's important to your programs, right? And there's not a wrong answer. And if maintaining,
there is a wrong answer. I just gave the right answer.
Maintaining tradition and a certain level of pageantry and whatever else is maybe a little bit more important. Okay, then this game becomes a playoff game. I mean, let's face it, the last couple of years it was, because the winner probably had a legit shot to get in and the loser was likely going to be out. And that's what we saw. So, I mean, it just kind of speeds up the process for these two teams a little bit, provided that they're both, have a record that supports them possibly being on the edge of getting in the bracket or already being in it.
I think it's hard for the teams involved in that game for the playoff game not to feel almost
I don't know how
smaller.
I don't know how Ouachita doesn't come out flat this week.
Right. I mean, that's the hard thing.
I agree with you. I get what you're saying, but it's a matter of, hey, the institutions get to make that call for themselves. That's part of the beauty of the D2 model. So,
no doubt.
But if you move that game up though, and then you're not playing Harding one of those last weeks, probably too, then one of these teams, with the way Harding has been that good in that league for a couple of years now, one of those teams is basically eliminated from the playoffs halfway through.
Yeah.
But having that game last guarantees that, like you said, both teams are kind of playing for it at that point and are still in the mix. Maybe you're not in the mix if you have a more front-loaded schedule.
That you're just kicking the can down the road at that point, John, because it's your whole body of work.
You are, but I mean that's what it is. You got to play these guys at some point. So I don't know if I was a little. We mentioned it with Grand Valley a second ago, and they have one of the best fan bases, maybe the best in D2. Mm-hmm. So this is not a new issue with playoff games being a little more lightly attended. But I did go down for a first round game, them in Northwest a couple of years ago, and I was a little disappointed by the crowd size at Ouachita.
Sure.
So, and that's, like I said, that's a problem across D2 playoffs, especially this first weekend. But I
think having a back-to-back impacts that too, though.
Yeah, no doubt. That can go with your point. I was trying to not totally disagree with you.
Well, good, John. Don't disagree with the host too much. Okay, moving ahead with things, guys. We've got some Harding folks who are going, I've waited 61 minutes and they're finally getting to my Bisons.
You put a 6 next to their name, so
I mean,
James can yell
our
at
guy
you.
James W., I think that he's already jumped off a building 20 minutes ago because he was thinking we weren't going to talk about them. But don't worry, James, it's going to be okay. You can stop, it'll be fine. So we've got the Bisons right here, and, they've got some eye-popping numbers. And we've talked about this all year. The defensive numbers. And I'll say it. I'll unpack this right now. The GAC does not have the most explosive offenses in D2. I'm going to just say it. But at the same time, the way Harding has gone about their business has been wildly impressive this whole way. And more dominant than they were last year when we looked at these same type of numbers. Mm-hmm. Now, does that mean that they're going to be a better chance of winning it this year? Well, let's be honest. They were undefeated, but at a 500 SOS and had the number 1 seed last year. I don't know if that would have happened this year, but in any event, they're gonna have their chance to win these games, and they had tough games last year, but they had them at home. Now they're gonna be on the road. So, John, as we put this together, the total defense, 180 yards per game allowed. That's a wild number there.
That is a crazy number, and like you said, the GAC doesn't necessarily have the explosive offenses, but man, if there was ever an explosive running game, it is Harding, and you see that with the 424 up above it. But they've been shutting people down this year. Like I put in the notes, the Ouachita game was obviously close, and they lost that. Other than that, the closest game they played is 34-7.
Right.
That is not, 27-point spread. And that's your next closest. That is incredibly impressive. And I don't know what happened against Ouachita. Maybe Ouachita's that good. Maybe Harding just had an off day. But they have been as dominant as a team can be other than that one day. So it's maybe Ferg being there just got in their heads and they got nervous. Maybe that. But
he's a knee buckler, man. Don't pick yourself.
You see him over there sipping that glass of wine, and you gotta freak out a little bit. But no, they've been a dominant team. Those 10 wins are as dominant as we've seen. And then they have the one blemish. So the question is, what's more real? And I think I'd have more questions if they didn't just win the national title last year. If this was going into last year with this resume, I'd say, okay, they haven't seen the quality of the Grand Valleys, the Ferris, the Pitt, but they just won the national title last year. They proved it. They're a heck of a football program. So I think that's kind of what you look at going into the playoffs. They're capable of beating anybody, despite, as James W. will point out, the 6th seed.
James must have gone to bed because he hasn't commented since we started talking about Harding.
Yeah,
but
sick of me.
And guys, we're always going to joke around with those who are in the comments, people who have been on quite a few times with us before. And we've got a lot of comments. And two things I want to kind of unpack with Harding while we're here. This question came up, or a comment. Harding is the only team that I really don't want Ferris to face.
Yeah.
And you know what? Almost every team in the field saying this.
I was going to say, join the club. Nobody wants to play that.
Now, and this is not strictly statistical. This is the style of play. Mm-hmm. You don't. I mean, there's coaching staffs who, once they find out they have Harding, they are on the phone with other coaches and on the phone with more coaches, talking to them about, when's the last time you saw the option? When's the last time you saw the option? And they go ahead and they confer with people they know and trust. And they may spend a good amount of time talking with them about, how should we go about this? What have you seen works? Oh, 3 down, 4 down. I mean, there's all kinds of things that come up when you have to play a team like this. Because, Tony, I mean, preparation is totally different.
100%.
And so it puts them in a really awkward position, when that happens.
For sure. And I mean, and the couple of things that I look at when I look at Harding and the numbers and whatever else, I mean, it's amazing to stop and think to yourself for a second of, okay, they lost one game and they only gave up a 17 spot in that game.
Yep.
I mean, that's how fantastic the defense is. At the same time, and I'm not going to try and diminish the defense in any way, Harding's a real good example of complementary football. And by that, I mean,
oh, absolutely.
When the offense is on and they're able to stay out in front of somebody, they are going to chew up clock like it's nobody's business and then put you behind and make you do things you don't want to do. And in a minute you're behind by 2 scores, 3 scores, if you had any hope of running the ball, then you're going to have to abandon that and you become one-dimensional because you're playing from behind. So there's an element of this where Harding's defense is formidable, and there's no question about that. But they get help from the fact that the offense goes out and does what it does, and nobody in the GAC seems to be able to do anything about it. And the defense doesn't have to be out there that much. I mean, Harding's time of possession this year was basically almost plus 10 minutes per game.
Right.
And so your defense isn't out there that much, and when they are out there, especially as the game wears on, they know what's coming. So you've made teams one-dimensional, even though you're one-dimensional yourself. So it's quite a thing to watch. I mean, it's extremely impressive.
Their playoff path too, with Pitt and possibly Grand Valley. Those are teams that want to be balanced, and Harding is the best team in the field, as you said, of knocking them out of that balance.
Well, I mean, let's be perfectly honest. If Harding beats Pitt, Harding's going to be heading up to Grand Valley, and then, Tony, all of a sudden, this same talk's going to be happening with folks in Grand Valley going, oh, interesting, they're coming to our place now. And it's, it's an interesting deal with all of that. Now,
yeah, for sure.
Something else that came up in the comments, let me see. We've actually got so many comments, guys, I'm having a hard time keeping track, which is not a terrible thing for us to have happen.
That's good. I might have encouraged some questions.
Andrew, I think that our guy James W. put Andrew up to this. But can someone explain to me how Harding, ranked 4th nationally, is 6th seed in SR3? Well, simply put,
we can all explain that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I've tried in the comments for weeks and weeks.
Yeah, I mean,
Mr. Wilson from Home Improvement look down here, by the way.
Yeah, that's fantastic.
Well, I mean, this isn't one of those tell me you haven't been watching our show without telling me you haven't been watching our show. But obviously, if you're 4th, ranked nationally, that's a opinion poll. The 6th seed is a math thing as to how you got there. So we're talking about apples and oranges in that regard. So that's kind of how we end up getting at something like that.
And it's not strictly math, Witt. I don't want you can't. The committee is still allowed to apply math the way that they want to. So there is a
criteria, I should say.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the key,
because the head-to-head's really what's killing them right now.
Correct. The key point that you need to make there is that, Andrew, where you're ranked in the polls has absolutely nothing to do with the NCAA selection process. Not a thing. You could be ranked number 1 in the country and have won your league outright, and that doesn't mean you're going to make the field. We've seen multiple years where teams have won their conferences outright. They don't make the bracket. The selection criteria is what it is, and that's what was applied here. And part of this is Harding and Ouachita, frankly, just being in Super Region 3. And we're going to talk about Indianapolis in a minute. We talked about this a little bit on Sunday. If they were in any other region, they're not on the edge of barely getting in. They might be having a home game this weekend. But Super Region 3, with the way the criteria is set up, this is what you end up with.
And if the seeding matched all of our opinions of these teams, you could tune out for the pick'em segment because, hey, we're going to pick all the favorites. It's no region has the exact same opinion of how we stack them on the field. Maybe they have the same opinion as how we'd stack them by the criteria. But on the field, all these are different because they're all really good teams. So we have them all in there.
Andrew, I'm going to put this very simply
because we get bored on a Sunday.
The polls are for entertainment purposes and for the schools to have something to talk about and promote their programs and things like that. If we're going to be really honest about it. So, Andrew, I'm assuming that maybe that you haven't come across this much in past years, but this is a pretty common thing that gets talked about.
So, especially in this super region where you're going to have 5 or 6 of the top teams in the country every single year.
Yep. And Brandon Meisner, our fearless leader and founder of this site, coined it very well. He said that the polls were for conversation only.
There you go.
And he loved having a poll for conversation because it gives people something to talk about all year. But again, Andrew, the people who are voting in the coaches poll are supposed to be the coaches. I'd be willing to bet you it's SIDs filling those out on a pretty regular basis. And the D2 poll is made up of people like me. How much can you trust that? I would say minimally.
Well, and this here, Tony digging
We've
a dig
got
on
3
himself.
voters on this show, and I don't think you can trust any of us 3.
Yeah, that's true. You do have 3 voters in our poll.
Nary at least less trustworthy lot will you encounter? Yes,
I'm going to give this one a simple answer: strength of schedule.
Yep,
that's all we need for that.
The math absolutely supports Pitt State being where they are. As hard as that might seem to, there's no one in our circle that looks at that and says, "Oh, that doesn't make sense."
Yeah, strength of schedule. Yep.
What that conveniently left off is they also have the best win in the nation this year.
There you go. There you go.
The most impressive win. It happened in week 0, but it's still there. You beat Fair State. Yeah, that cancels out a mediocre loss.
And then the follow-up question of Emporia State, ? They're not in the tournament. So that I'll answer that.
And mediocre loss is even a little hard. Any other region, and Emporia State and Fort Hays State are really good teams. They just kind of fell behind, like we said, a whole bunch of top 10 teams in this region.
Yep. Okay, so let's go ahead. We talked about Harding quite a bit there. There they are on their socials. I like it. We're back. And, they haven't gone away. So, when we take a look at their offensive attack, with all due respect to how they run their offense, I'll be honest, I think the 2 guys who make them go the most are the dive back, Blake Delacruz, and the home run hitting slot that they have who can come around the edge, Braden Jay, and take it to the house. And when you take a look at the fact that Braden Jay's got some receiving yards, it kind of shows how they're trying to be a little bit more multiple with how they're doing things. which I think is good preparation for the moments where they play great defenses that are going to make them have to do a little something more. And so I think that that's interesting. A guy who doesn't get much shine is linebacker Clark Griffin. Now, I mention him because he's led them in tackles each of the last 2 seasons.
Yep.
5'9", 185 pounds, I'm going to say. Transfer from Alabama. He was a walk-on with Alabama. And if you take a look at him, 8 tackles for loss, 3.5 sacks, 6 quarterback hurries. This guy does a little everything. And so if you watch Harding, watch the way 24 goes and cleans up a whole lot. I want to say he's got twice as many tackles as anybody else on that defense. That's a crazy number when you think about it for a defense that gets off the field.
Yes.
Yeah.
So,
and the comments on the Braden J receiving yards, because he'll tell you it's about 50 yards per reception. So
yeah.
He'll repeat it. So I think he might only have 5 catches for the year, but it's
right. They always go for big plays.
He's hard to bring down in the open field. That's for sure.
Yeah. So as we kind of continue through the Bisons, we move on into UIndy. Now, UIndy is the team of the 7 here, who frankly is getting no love in comparison. And the thing is that no fault of theirs, they are in with incredibly difficult company here. I mean, we're talking about all teams that are essentially ranked right around the top 10. So now UIndy in the GOVC, let's be real frank, this league is not up there with the GLIAC, the MIAA, and some of the others that we've been mentioning. Now UIndy, though, the more I looked at them, the more I actually thought, guys, and this will be an unpopular opinion there in the comments, I think they're going to give Grand Valley everything they can handle. I really do. I think that this team's they played Saginaw Valley. Saginaw Valley's their only loss. That was a 28-24 game. They played right there with them. Yep. Outgained Saginaw. They had 360 yards of offense against a very good Saginaw defense. I don't think that Indy is necessarily going to be stunned when they play this game. They played against Pitt each of the last 2 years. They've got a quarterback who was, a very good player a year ago. Now, John, you had mentioned here also a quick in your notes area. What did you have for us there?
Yeah, Gavin, I believe Sukup is his name.
Yep.
He won a JUCO national title, and to me that was kind of worth noting that because that's playoff games and that's whatever level you're at. If you win a national title, you got a little bit of that big game moxie
swag, yeah.
And I thought that was worth putting in there, that it's, even though Indy hasn't had that much playoff success in recent years, they got guys used to winning some big games.
Yeah, and let's go ahead. I bet most of our audience doesn't have a clue who we're going to talk about right now, but let's run through it. That's why we have a show like this. Yeah,
but I don't know if they do.
Tony, you can probably still recall a few years ago when we were talking about John Lewis, because he came over from D3 as their leading rusher coming on into Indy. Now, he didn't make a big splash with them last year. He was sharing a little bit of time.
Yeah,
this year,
Toriano Clinton was in front of him.
So, you've got here, if we take a look, you got a 1,000-yard rusher. He also catches plenty of balls out of the backfield as well.
For sure.
I have got a feeling that if you're in UIndy, I don't know how many yards he's going to rush for against a great Grand Valley defense, but I'd be almost equally concerned about him catching balls out of the backfield.
Absolutely. And that's, I'm sure that's one of the things that Grand Valley is keying in on, is not so much how's Lewis necessarily going to pose a threat or a problem in the run game, because he is, but that's certainly a known quantity. It's kind of the inverse of the 2 key guys you've got there offensively, right? Is how are they going to potentially deploy Lewis in the pass game? And do they put more of the rushing attack onto Gavin Sukup?
Yep.
And how do they do that schematically to create confusion assignment wise on Grand Valley's front seven and even into their back end for coming up to make plays? I think it's not so much where their strengths lie that you automatically think, it's that sub strength that you think that's a lot of yards rushing for a quarterback. And that's a lot of receiving for a back. What are they going to do to leverage that to actually make themselves look a little bit different than what most of what people would see on tape in terms of preparation?
And you know what, Tony? If you're Grand Valley, I'd be thinking they might try and do the Ferris thing where they're going to go ahead and run their quarterback off tackle or do something maybe that wasn't exactly what you would expect.
Sure.
And try and go to school on that. Now, I'm not saying that these guys are the same guys that are playing at Ferris State, but they got some skilled players here. Let's not kid ourselves.
Nope.
And this scheme can throw the ball. They've got nice balance. But I think that they're going to be the Grand Valley offense has probably not given me enough faith this year, Tony, that this game, I wouldn't be shocked if this game was close at half. And if you're Grand Valley, you don't want to have a game close at half with an offense that hasn't been explosive on your own behalf.
Right.
And put yourself in that scenario.
Well, and not only that, but it's like when you look at if Sukup does want to go downfield, Anthony Crowell is the leading receiver on that team, but I'd be more scared of Alonzo Derrick, who at over 20 yards a catch, when he's catching the ball, it's downfield and it's making big plays. And he leads the team in receiving touchdowns outside of, I think, their tight end, who probably gets a lot of red zone type stuff.
Right.
But in terms of big play accounting, that Derrick's the guy that they got to be worried about as well. So I mean, this is an offense that can make you mindful of every level, and that's something that in preparation, Grand Valley is really going to have to be tuned in for.
Well, no, Derrick Alonso, number 5 on offense, physically looks very similar to John Lewis. He's like 5'9", I want to say, very quick. And I think that they're going to try and get some mismatches that they feel that they're going to be able to get some way or another in that passing game, whether it's putting them in the slot, other spots, to try and get what they feel is a favorable matchup. And Indy's defense is very strong. Now, it's all relative, though, based on they've been playing the GLVC schedule. That's the only real concern I'm having is Grand Valley just going to be able to overpower them in the run game? And if they do, that's where Grand Valley kind of gets loose a little bit in this game. But I tell you, if I'm a Lakers fan, I'm concerned about this football team, and I'm not looking at them like they're the last team that made it in SR3.
Sure. Well, and if I'm a Grand Valley fan too, I mean, if you look at where Indianapolis may have that little bit of the weakness in the games that they've played and let teams be too close to them, it's teams that can throw the ball. And that's just not what Grand Valley wants to do. They've shown in flashes that they can do it, but that's not really where they want to be. So, yeah, look, it's the playoffs, man. There are no gimmies. It's just that's just not how it is.
And there's a certain element of playing with house money in this game too. I mean,
absolutely.
If you're UIndy, you went through the entire season. If you have a close game in the GLVC, it feels like it's, what's wrong with UIndy? You go to overtime with William Jewell. You have a close one with Truman. It's, are they going to be able to – we had those conversations early in the year after they took the Saginaw loss and had a couple close games.
Yep.
And then you survive. Now you've won in dominant fashion, really, the GLVC. Nobody else was really in contention there. And then you go into the playoffs, and nobody thinks you have a chance against Grand Valley, who a lot of people are picking to win the title. So go into it and throw it all on the table, and maybe that doesn't help against Grand Valley's run game. That's just going to come right at you. But offensively, yeah, if you think you've got some packages to get Lewis in space receiving the ball, go for it, because this is the game to let it all hang out, I guess.
100%. Nope, house money is exactly what I would have said too, JD, and was kind of saving it for when we did the side by sides. But that's exactly
no,
not at all. We're on the same wavelength. I totally agree.
Well, now that I've said all that, and my big mug is going to be on the bulletin board for Grand Valley, saying that this can be or get everything they can handle here. They will probably win the game by 20 points. But as we were kind of alluding to, we've just went through all the preview of the teams. Don't worry, it only took us about an hour and 20 minutes. So if you had something else to do, sorry, we've taken up all this time. For those who love all of this, well, you're getting plenty of it. ESPN Plus, we are told, is going to be the source of the playoff games. Once they get into the semifinals and finals, obviously all bets are different. You know, you could go ahead and end up having this on one of the main ESPNs or ESPN Plus or 2 or whatever it is. You'll hear a whole lot more about that before that time. All you need to know right now is ESPN Plus.
And Joe in the comments has already commented that that the streams, I guess, are already up there. Like it says upcoming or whatever.
Beautiful.
So hopefully that means we're on pace for that.
Locked and loaded.
Oh,
Outstanding.
I wasn't sure if that meant the cameras were already there and they were.
Just
you could watch team practice maybe or something.
Trying to catch Tony doing his laps around Lubbers or something.
Yeah, something right. So let's go ahead and as we move forward with some finishing topics right before we jump into our predictions. Some other things I want to mention is this did come on out today that the Harlan Hill Award winner has not played his last football game with UCM. They'll be heading down to Texas to play against UTPB, and Chris McCullough was on our show last night with we had a coach on from SR4 on our show picking the games and everything. So if you missed that, go find that and like and subscribe and all. I'm supposed to say that every show, right, John? They're supposed to hit like and subscribe on all these on YouTube. Is that right? Yeah, exactly. We're not YouTube people. We just pretend to be. But this game, maybe we'll talk a little bit more about it when we get closer to that time because there won't be many games to talk about then. But that'll be not the low scoring special. That one for sure.
No. Take the over.
Now, Zach Zabrowski, I felt obligated to show this. He was our offensive player of the week, not just for that reason am I showing this. He was 44 of 47 passing. 4 touchdowns, 614 yards, 7 total scores.
Right.
Tony, I've seen us do players of the week a lot.
Yeah.
I don't know if I've seen 44 or 47 before.
That's going to break that passer rating abacus thing that they use.
So if you hadn't seen that, a little bit wild right there. So
he's still a pretty good ball player. So.
Yes, I think that show. Yeah, we're on that one show where we said, maybe he won't win the award this year. Ever since then,
Lambo said, "Not so fast, my friend."
Well,
yeah.
Again, you look. I look at that and I say, okay, completion percentage. Okay, very good.
That's
but
it's not 5 for 5 though.
But he point taken. But I'm a sample size guy too. That's another thing you'll hear me say. Yeah. He had 3 touchdowns on the ground in this game. It's one thing when he was throwing it all over the lot. He still ran it in 3 times.
Yeah, now he's trying to run the rush title as well and the whole deal. But
he ran a little bit last year. This year, with the running back injuries they've had to lean on him.
Yeah.
And, he's pretty good at that too. So,
he almost put up 100 on Pitt. Yeah. So, well, let's go ahead. And this is, they've already probably heard Tony and I on Sunday, but you know what? Maybe Tony and I decide to throw a curveball at you. We'll see. Ouachita at Central Oklahoma. Tony, I'm going to go to you first. Offer us, kind of how you've had a chance to think about this game a little bit more than last time you went and talked about it. What are your thoughts?
Well, I still think just based on playoff history that we've seen most recently, I worry that Ouachita is going to have what it takes to be able to beat an MIAA team. But at the same time, this is a different MIAA team. This is not the same massive defensive physicality, going to completely take away what you want to do, trying to move the football. They're almost going to say, yeah, well, we're going to do what we can to get stops, but whatever you do, we're just going to outshoot you. And I think part of the problem is I just don't know if Ouachita's got enough firepower to be able to outshoot UCO in this game. I mean, you were talking about how Connor Flanagan's been digged up. Carter McElhaney's had a pretty good season, 19 yards a catch, and he's got 5 touchdowns. So he's a get loose kind of guy, but can he get loose enough against this defense? And, can Ouachita actually convert on enough possessions where they're able to possess the ball for extended periods of time and keep the UCO offense on the sidelines? I just don't know if it's there. There's no result in this game that would surprise me, to be perfectly honest with you, but I got a hard time seeing that Central Oklahoma doesn't get the win.
Fair enough. My MIAA expert, I'm going to now.
Yes, you're on.
I know that's a little strong, but
I think the
wait.
Okay.
For everyone who hasn't had a chance to see our MIAA show, John was on a love fest with this team for so long. He was beating me over the head with his top 25, saying, they should be the top team in the country or whatever it was.
When I started that crusade, I think they're a lot closer now than where I said they'd be than you did. I'm just saying.
Okay, I'll give you that, but my whole thing was they need to prove it yet.
Yeah.
Don't forget, I said Pitt would beat him, and Pitt beat him, so I'm gonna die on that hill. But yeah, so getting away from that for a moment, how do you see this one?
I see this one as we are going to know by the end of the first quarter. Can Ouachita hang with the weapons they have on the outside and the pure speed they have, or is Ouachita going to just be able to run all over them? I think we know extremely early because whoever has the lead is going to be able to put that pressure on, especially if it's Ouachita and the way they can control a game. I kind of agree with Tony. I think the speed is going to be too much and the weapons are going to be too much. And I'm picking UCO in this one. But I really think we're going to know early on if Ouachita's just running it up and down, if Kendall Givens is crushing them, or if UCO is just running past everybody and scoring on every play. I think it's going to be apparent early. I'm not 100% sure which way it's going to be apparent early, but I would put my money on UCO.
I have a feeling that UCO might hit him with a blitzkrieg here of it's 21-7 after one quarter kind of deal.
Yeah.
Maybe I'm way off, but I just got that. I have a feeling that this is a little different deal for them, a little different matchup. UCO hasn't given me a ton of faith over this last month, the way they've gone about things, if we're going to be perfectly honest. But I think UCO is able to go out and get loose in this game at some point. Like Tony alluded to, I just don't get the impression that Ouachita's got enough firepower to stay in this game. We could all be wrong, but we're all going with UCO right here and now.
I'm a proponent of deferring if you win the toss early. In this game, I think I'm the opposite way because I think it's important to play with the lead in this one. I think once you get out in front, it's either way, it's just going to be hard.
Absolutely, and we've got our guy Doug Williams, who is
Doug hasn't seen our pick'em record this year apparently because he's excited that we picked UCO. I think that might be the kiss of death.
Well, and by the way, we appreciate everybody for tuning on in. Let's go ahead and move along with the games here.
Rocky has UCO by 4 touchdowns. I think he might be getting that off Massey because I don't quite see that.
Massey has a 5-point spread in that game for UCO. Now, keep in mind, Massey also includes 3 years worth of data.
Yep.
If they were including only this year, I don't think they probably land on that score. But at the end of the day, I don't really care that much. So
it probably cancels out the MIAA bias, though, having those 3 years of data that knocks it down a little bit.
Yeah, that's true. UIndy at Grand Valley. John, I'm going to start with you on this one.
We just said a lot of nice things about UIndy. and I don't.
Oh, you're bringing out the Velvet Hammer. Boom.
Yep, I don't. We said our nice things, and now the fact of the matter is, it's really hard to win up there in Allendale in the playoffs. And the MIAA, as the MIAA expert, quote unquote, we've seen that a lot with Ferris and Ferris and Grand Valley beating MIAA teams up there, and I can't see UIndy pulling this one off. I think this one might be Grand Valley by a few scores. So this one might be closer to Rocky's prediction in the comments.
And by the way, Doug wanted to give a compliment, John. He must be used to watching our MIAA show. He said this has been a good show. Not like that normal crap we have on MIAA Weekly. But so Tony.
It's probably the other way around. He's used to watching just you and I, and they're like, "Thank God this JD guy's there."
Yeah, right.
Freaking saving us.
Well, so Tony, how do you see this one playing out?
So I have to admit, Witt, I might be a little closer to you on some of this than JD might be, just from the standpoint that, again, Grand Valley has over the last few weeks had some inconsistencies and a lot of unpredictability. I mean, even the most impressive performance that they've had over the closing stretch was a 20-0 win up at Michigan Tech, and yet in that game they were only 3 of 6 in the red zone, and they had 4 offensive linemen get hurt to varying degrees of availability for the playoffs. So I think offensively for Grand Valley, they've got their work cut out for them to actually get out there and move the ball and own the line of scrimmage with some consistency. At the same time, it's been a while since Indianapolis has seen anybody who's really worth a salt. And that's not to disparage their schedule. They've got what they've got as far as the schedule goes. But over the last 5 weeks, they only played one team with a winning record.
So and this is a playoff show, Tony. That's fair.
It's been a while since they've seen somebody who's like, ooh, okay, that's a real football team. Not to say that they can't handle it and they're not up for the challenge. Like John said, house money. I think for me, the biggest thing that I'm looking forward to seeing is what does Indianapolis try to do? Because I have a hard time believing that over the course of 4 quarters, they're going to be able to slow down Grand Valley's run game. They might keep it close for a while. I just don't think they've got 4 quarters worth of stopping that in them. I'm interested to see what they do when they have the ball. So Grand Valley's pass rush is one of the most lethal in Division II, and yet over the last handful of weeks, you've seen teams mitigate that really effectively by doing 2 things. Running the ball even when the matchup doesn't warrant it, and when they throw the ball, they get the ball out quick. And I don't know if that's bread and butter. I haven't seen enough UIndy tape to really know. Are they more of a drop back outfit? And how are they going to be able to pass pro against what Grand Valley likes to do, both coming off the edge and with their blitz packages? So to me, that's going to be the real interesting thing is if it is a passing situation, how well does Indianapolis deal with what Grand Valley is going to do pressure-wise?
Yeah.
And if they are getting the ball out quick, that's one thing that Grand Valley does well is, man, they tackle in space. And so if you throw the ball short, that doesn't mean you're going to get the first down because you're likely going down as soon as you make the catch. So it's how Indianapolis's offense deals with those different types of caliber and qualities of pressure that Grand Valley is going to present. I think that's the key to this one as well. So, I think Grand Valley is the favorite. I don't think there's really, anything mysterious about that. But how effective the offense is and how quickly they put Indianapolis into a situation where they have to be a little bit more one-dimensional, that's going to be the key as to whether or not Grand Valley stretches it out or if this thing stays closer for a little bit longer than Laker fans would hope to see.
Yeah, I'm more interested in this game than I thought I would be when the pairings came out, and I think Indy can make this game a real schmaz and a real slog that Grand Valley doesn't want to be in. I think Grand Valley still survives and advances, but I wouldn't be surprised if we're looking at a 24-17 kind of game where Grand Valley goes, well, we got through that. Now, at the same time, if Grand Valley can go ahead and really push the issue up front on both sides of the ball, everything we just said changes because they can dominate the football game that way.
All day.
And we very well may see that. But I think this game's a little bit more interesting than the initial look that we may have given it Sunday night when the pairings just came out. So
no, I agree. And I think JD's house money statement, again, kind of comes back around. One of the other things that he pointed out was that Indy's won 2 of the last 3 against Grand Valley. Now, you're going back,
Been a little
I
while.
say 10 years.
Yeah.
I think those 3 games all happened pre-COVID.
Yeah.
right.
But Indianapolis and all their years in the GLIAC, yes, folks, for those of you who are newer to the proceedings, Indianapolis was in the GLIAC for a lot of years as a football affiliate member. But in their 20-ish years, it might have been even a little bit more than that they were in the GLIAC, their overall record was really right around 500 for all the years that they were in the league. But since they've been out of the league, they have fared well against GLIAC opponents. And so what that tells you is that for those one-off games, yeah, they can get up for that. They know what it's required, and they figure out ways to get it done. It's just, are they built for the week in, week out meat grinder that is a GLIAC schedule, not entirely unlike and whatnot of an MIAA schedule? That's where it just tends to even itself out over time. But to have to be able to beat a team or 2 teams that those are the only ones you're going to play all year. They went 1-1 against the GLIAC this year. Saginaw had to rally late to beat them, and they handled Wayne before Wayne figured out how to get Champ Edwards going. So, I mean, it's, they could do it. So, I mean, again, they've got house money here, and they're not going to be afraid by any means.
Each of these last 2 years before this, they had to go play at Pitt.
Yeah.
Everybody thought that's a bad deal for them. First year, Pitt kind of got the best of them right from the jump.
Oh, that game last year was...
And Indy had moments last year where they were able to hang around for a bit. A little more than we thought they would. They're experienced with playing 100%. Good, strong programs here. So it'll be interesting to see. I don't think they're going to come in completely wide-eyed, but Lubbers is not going to be as crazy loud as if they're playing Ferris State or something like that. So, but once again, keep your eye on that game, folks. Don't just discard it. Is kind of what I'm getting at. But Harding at Pitt, the biggest one of the bunch, in my opinion. Boy, you take a look at this offensive scoring difference. They have them doubled up, literally. That's shocking for a team that is, basically playing at home. Let's go, John. I'm going to start off with you here. How do you see this one playing out?
I am going to shock James W. here, and I'm going to pick Harding. I think Harding has had one bad week, as I said earlier, and other than that, I think they've been dominant all year. And they probably don't play the schedule that a Pittsburgh State is. Nobody in the country has played the schedule Pitt State has really this year, other than maybe Ferris playing at Pitt and then going through the GLIAC. But
and Grand Valley was at Pueblo and West Florida. So I mean, you got 3 teams there that those were, I think, the 3 highest strength of schedules of any of the playoff teams by a pretty good amount. Pueblo's was pretty high too.
But Harding's they've taken care of business in every game this year except the one. And I just think if they're able to get going against Pitt and run the ball a little bit, which obviously they can do, I just think it's going to be hard for Pittsburgh State to keep up, especially if there is any question in the quarterback room of what's going on there. So I think Harding last year graduated to the fact where when they play GLIAC and MIAA teams, we can't poo-poo the schedule or anything like that. They're serious and they're the defending national champions for a reason. I think they find a way to go on the road and get this one done.
Yeah, and we've got a comment here. JB has mentioned in regard to this game, Northwest and Grand Valley gave the blueprint on how to stop Harding's run up to the Pitt offense. Well, yes and no. I mean, it's
that blueprint hasn't been working out very well.
There were 10 tems this year that had that same blueprint and didn't do a damn thing. So don't talk to me about that.
Well, Colorado Mines is smart people, and yet they got raced in the championship. So now I'll give JB one point that I think Pitt has the dudes,
Yeah, that's the question.
which is the difference in a lot of this, in my opinion. Now that said, I think that they will do well against the Harding offense, but I got to be honest with you. I feel much better about how Harding has gone about their business this whole season than some of the indecision I've seen with Pitt. Whether it's their offensive execution, what's going on at quarterback right now, and then you got Harding coming on in. I mean, yeah. This is a heck of a football game. If you're going to tune into one game all weekend in D2, this is it. Now, John, you went with Harding.
I think Simmons is a heck of a coach too, and
Mhm.
Tom Anthony, he's certainly done well. He is still a first-year coach, first-year playoff run. I have a lot of respect for what Paul Simmons does there.
Tony, how do you see this one coming on out?
I picked Harding on Sunday, and I'm sticking with it. But I have to admit I'm still firmly in that camp, but I might be just sliding that a little bit more towards and again, it comes down to me. I just don't know what I have with Pitt State on offense. I think defensively, JB's point about the blueprint, you got to have the dudes, and you nailed it, Witt. I think Pitt State does have the dudes, and you talked about the linebackers, and they're critical, but another big thing that gets overlooked in trying to stop an attack like Harding's is, can your back end tackle in space? Safeties and corners have to be in the right spot, and they got to make tackles when they've got a guy on one-on-one, and it's his turn to make that stop. And I think Pitt State has shown throughout the year, and they did a great job against Ferris in the first game back in week 0, being able to make tackles in space. That's one of the keys that's critical. Blueprint aside, if you can't make tackles, you're still going to be looking at somebody running the other way while you're laying on the ground going, how the hell did I miss that guy? That can't happen. I think Pitt State's got what it takes to keep this game close. It's just a matter of whether or not the offense, generates enough. And I think Harding's going to probably play a little angry in this game, just because, hey, we're the defending national champs, and they understand how the process works, but they're probably going to still try to take, being on the road as a slight. So I've got Harding in this one, but there are very few results in this game that would surprise me. If Pitt State found a way to generate enough points, I wouldn't be like, holy crap, I didn't see that coming. Just because I think their defense does have what it needs to be able to keep Harding at least from running away and scoring, putting up a 50 burger.
Yeah, I agree. I have Harding winning a low scoring game. I could see like a 21-16 kind of ball game. Pitt, I think Pitt's going to get in position. I don't know if they're going to score touchdowns, but I think they're going to score some field goals. And I don't know if that's going to be enough on a day like this. All three of us are taking Harding. Now, for what it's worth, on our Sunday night show, Tony, I think we were fairly split, and we had some folks like Ferg.
Yeah.
And I think maybe even Chuck or someone else had taken Pitt State. So this isn't a matter of our whole staff is seeing it this way. It just happens to be on this show.
Yeah.
But I once again, I think this is the top game of the weekend, and I can't wait to see kind of how this one plays on out.
Yeah, I don't think Harding's scoring anywhere near 52 points, but I don't think Pittsburgh State's scoring 26 either. So it's how low you get. I see a similar score to you, Witt, where this game's high teens, low 20s.
Yeah. Well, I do want to go ahead and give everybody a reminder that we do have, this is just our day 2 of our Super Region shows. I can't guarantee that the other shows will go quite this long, but we're just shy of 2 hours here. So folks who wanted to hear about Super Region 3, you got that on steroids in this one. I do want to go ahead. We didn't have a chance to get to some of the questions that we had during the show, and like Todd had a question here about how would we predict UCM and Fort Hays to do another. I got to be honest with you, with all that we have going on here, we don't really have enough time to kind of unpack, kind of fantasy booking with how would the teams who didn't make it do in other areas and such. But
Well,
looking at,
I'll take a stab at it though, Witt, to say this: any of those teams that are in the upper half of the MIAA and probably the upper half of the GLIAC would do well in those other regions.
oh, sure.
But you have to look at it through the lens of, if you're in that region, the ask is not the same. Part of why these teams in Super Region 3 are so stinking good is because they know that's what it takes just to get out of the region.
Yeah.
So when you're not asked to do that, to get out of your own region, chances are you're not going to be at that level. So part of why, yeah, it stinks. Could Central Missouri go and win Super Region 1? I would think they'd probably be the favorite the minute you drop them in there. But that's partially is because they exist in Super Region 3. If they were in Super Region 1 all the time, I don't know you could say the same thing.
I'm going to go ahead. Guys, essentially, I was bringing those up because we weren't going to answer them as opposed to answering them. But
well, you're just teasing people, Witt. Come on.
Well,
we're in this far. What's the difference?
No. Essentially, I just kind of wanted to mention that, with this, we won't have the time to unpack all of the next year dramatic change. Later on, when we get further into the super regions and we have less games and less to unpack, we can talk about a little bit more about something like that. But that's a 15-minute answer right there in itself.
It's a good time.
With this crew,
it sure is.
5-minute answer.
But as we're kind of going through this, there was lastly something I had kind of looked at was, this was asked for the show. Who's the Cinderella team for this playoff? I mean, I think we all see, if we're going to go by Cinderella, Harding's the easy answer because they're a 6 seed.
If you count the defending national champs as a Cinderella.
Yeah. Well, but anybody who's not hosting is a Cinderella, essentially.
I don't know.
If we go on that, if we go by one that nobody really predicts to maybe win the first round, I might go to Witt's territory and say Bemidji State.
I think that's safe.
Just to give somebody another answer. But yeah, if Harding's an acceptable answer, they could win it all very easily.
I would go with the Bemidji State or maybe even a New Haven.
Yeah. And I would say Bemidji, possibly. A Wingate would be somebody I would look at.
Yep. Well, they are a 2 seed, Tony. But
well, yeah, but I mean, let's face it.
National champs is one.
To win the whole thing, a team that's never gotten that far before.
Oh,
yes.
Yeah, they just said a Cinderella team in this playoff. I didn't know if that really meant you win the whole thing, but yeah.
And I would look at Central Washington, maybe. That could be another one.
They did it last year.
Yeah. Well, folks, really appreciate you guys making the time, joining us for everything on the show. Sorry we took you for almost 2 hours. I guarantee you won't be that long next week.
Content, we can make it to that 2-hour mark.
No, some of us have jobs we have to get up for in the morning. But well, guys, thanks again, everybody, for tuning in. Everybody in the comments, and we will see you guys out at the games.